I remember when I was in ninth grade at Ner Yisrael in Baltimore. So we had our first Rosh Hashanah in Yeshiva, and davening was much, much longer than I had ever imagined davening could be. It went on, Yeshiva davening is longer, it's more intense. And there was shofar blowing, and then there was Musaf, and by the end of Musaf, you're very, very exhausted. And then all of a sudden, they start blowing shofar again. And I must have heard it in shul before then, but for some reason it hit me. I thought we were finished already. And yet they were blowing shofar again and again and again and again, and there didn't seem to be any particular end to it. So what I want to do today is I want to go over literally the evolution of the mitzvah of Tekiyas Shofar and how it turned out that we blow 10 times more than the Torah requires us to blow, and to try to explain why that's so and how do you get from 9 to 100. That's 100 if you make no mistakes. If you make mistakes, you got to correct them, so that's going to increase it as well. First, the Torah says, first of all, the Torah does not use the word shofar at all in connection to Rosh Hashanah. The Torah says in Parshas Emor, in Chumash Vayikra, Zichrein Trua, that the day of the seventh month, the first of Tishrei, shall be a remembrance of a Trua, a blowing sound. In Parshas Pinchas, in the book of Bamidbar, Rosh Hashanah is described as Yom Trua, a day of blowing. Zichrein Trua, Yom Trua. Now the word Trua itself can actually mean shouting or singing. It doesn't automatically mean blowing. In fact, the Karaites, who do not believe in the oral law, they do not blow shofar in Rosh Hashanah. They have a shofarless Rosh Hashanah because they interpret Yom Teruah to mean a day of shouting, a day of praying to God, which of course it is, but they say it doesn't mean shofar. So it is important to note that the Torah does not say that the Trua is through shofar. It does not say it. And theoretically, there are two possibilities. One is, like the Karaites, that Trua means shouting or singing. And the other is, the Trua does mean blowing, but maybe you blow a trumpet, the silver trumpets. So you got to jump over 2 hurdles to get to shofar, but nevertheless, based on the Torah Shebal Peh, Chazal understood, really Halach al-Moshe Misinai, that the Trua is b'shofar, shofar meaning an animal horn. It doesn't have to be a ram. Any type of animal horn is kosher for a shofar. The minhag is, among many people, to use a ram's horn because that's connected to the Akedah, the ram. On the other hand, have you ever seen these gigantic shofars? They're not from rams, they're from like antelopes or whatever it is, and that's also kosher. The Ramban writes, the only requirement for a kosher shofar is that it be a horn that is naturally hollowed. In other words, it's like a horn that grows around a bony core. But if you just take a piece of bone and you drill through the bone, that is not a kosher shofar. A shofar has to be kind of the horn that grows around the bone, so when you remove it, you actually have a natural hollow in the horn. But other than that, there's no halacha of which animal it has to be. The Gemara does say that you cannot use the horn of a cow or a bull or a calf, and there are a few reasons that's given, but the primary reason that's given is ein kategor nases sanegor, which means, this is actually an expression that's even entered modern Hebrew, a prosecuting attorney will not be the best defense attorney because the prosecuting attorney was always looking for your blemishes. And since the horn of a calf or a cow or a bull is reminiscent of the golden calf, the chet egel, shofar time, when we are pleading for mercy, we don't use evidence of our sin because it is, as it were, reminding Hashem of the chet egel. Now, obviously, you're not reminding Hashem of the Chet HaEgel. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is aware of the Chet HaEgel, whether we do something or not. But there's a certain arrogance. There's an arrogance of a person who is, waving around the evidence of his sin and saying to Hashem, give me mercy. And the Gemara gives another example where we apply the rule of Ein Kateger Nasa Sanegar. We apply that rule on Yom Kippur. The Kohen Gadol's garments on Yom Kippur normally contain gold thread, like the breastplate and the like have zahav in it. But when he goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he only wears white linen. He does not wear any gold in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And there too, the Gemara says, Ein Kateger Nasa Sanegar. Gold is also reminiscent of the Chet HaEgel. So when the Kohen Gadol goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, we do not want him to bring in gold. Now, because of that, there actually are minhagim. They're not dinim. They're minhagim that, number one, many people wear white on Yom Kippur. Married people, most wear kittles, and even women wear white, although it's not a requirement. I guess virtually everybody wore a white shirt. Maybe that counts for the minhag too. Some people wear a white kippah. It's all because of the purity of the Kohen Gadol. And the other thing, which is a negative minhag, is that people do not wear gold jewelry on Yom Kippur. So whether it's a woman's necklace or whether it's a man's watch or whatever it is, now again, let me point out, the halacha limits gold only when the Kohen Gadol goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which Bechlal doesn't apply today. The minhag applies that all of us, we don't wear gold. And then there's a machlokes, does that only apply to yellow gold? Does it apply to white gold? Does it apply to fake gold, where it looks like gold, but it's fake? Fake gold is probably mutter, but you have a marisayan problem if people think you're wearing real gold, so you should avoid that. Okay, so that's the requirement of shofar. But again, point number one is that without the oral law, you would not know as basic an idea that you blow a shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Because the only lashon the Torah uses is teruah. Now, there is one place where the Torah does say you have to blow a shofar. There is one place. But that one place is not Rosh Hashanah. In Parshas Bahar, when the Torah talks about the Jubilee year, the Yovel year, and the Yovel year is every 50 years in Eretz Yisrael, the slaves go free, and the land goes back to the original owners of the land. So it says, on Yom Kippur of Yovel, you blow a shofar teruah, because although obviously a Yovel year begins on Rosh Hashanah like any other year, but the halachas of Yovel don't kick in until Yom Kippur. So in a sense, Yovel is a strange year. The Yovel as Yovel begins on Yom Kippur, and it is inaugurated by a shofar blast. So the only way we know that you blow a shofar on Rosh Hashanah is because we learn it out of Yovel. It's like a Gezerah Shabbat. It says Trua by Rosh Hashanah. It says Trua by Yovel. By Yovel it says V'havartem Shofar Trua. So we take the shofar of the Yovel and we bring it over to Rosh Hashanah. Yeah, again, maybe this is an obvious point that you know already, but it's quite striking that, we often think Torah Shebaal Peh kind of just fills in some, obscure details. Here you actually have an example that without the Torah Shebaal Peh, you would literally be ignorant of what the mitzvah is. You literally would not know that you have to blow a shofar on Rosh Hashanah, because Yom Teruah and Zichron Teruah do not tell you explicitly that it has to be a shofar. And now you understand why the Karaites don't blow shofar, because they don't accept the Torah Shebaal Peh. So just looking at the word Teruah literally, that could mean shouting, that could be singing, whatever it would be. Memela, the Karaites actually do not have a shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Again, it's interesting how they came to that conclusion. Okay, so now, assuming that we know you blow a shofar, because that's what Chazal tell us, how many times do you have to blow the shofar? So Chazal say, the Torah says the word teruah 3 times, a day of blowing. Twice by Rosh Hashanah, Yom Zichron Teruah in Emor, Yom Teruah in Pinchas, and once again we bring the Yovel one. v'havartem shofar trua. So you have to blow 3 truas. We'll see what that is in a moment. On Rosh Hashanah, 3 truas, meaning 3 sets of crying sounds. Now, even after that step, you still don't know it has to be, there's a tekiah. Because the Torah only says trua, which is a crying sound. It doesn't say tekiah. So again, the Torah Sheba'al Peh comes in and teaches us that we have a Messiah based on different rashos, that every trua must be bracketed by a tekiah before and a tekiah afterwards. And actually there's some beautiful remuzim to this, because the trua, which is the sound of crying, represents the pain that I feel over my averus. I cry to Hashem to forgive me. But we have to know that even with the agony of our tshuva, the tekiah represents joy and confidence. And we have to bracket the broken heart with a simcha. And even tshuva has to be done with simcha. That's very important. Tshuva, like all mitzvahs, have to be done with simcha. Tshuva has to be done with simcha. So there is the breaking of the heart, but it's bracketed by simcha. Okay. So when all is said and done, once we have the Torah Sheba'al Peh, we now know what the mitzvah d'oraisa is, and it's simply 9 kolos. How do I get 9 kolos? Tekiah, teruah, tekiah. That's 3. Tekiah, trua, tekiah. That's 3. Tekiah, trua, tekiah is 3. That's all. You have to hear the shofar min Torah 9 times on Rosh Hashanah. And the way that works is every tekiah is counted as 1 sound and a set of trua. I don't count the trua as 9. The trua, da 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 da, which is 9 things, is 1, right? So tekiah, trua, tekiah, tekiah, trua, tekiah, tekiah, trua, tekiah. You are yotzei, the mitzvah d'oraisa. That is 9 kolos. That is what we'll call stage 1 in the mitzvah of blowing the shofar. We then come to stage 2, which is a rabbinic takana. When should these 9 sounds be heard? Meaning, the Torah is indifferent. The Torah says, on Rosh Hashanah, I got to hear these 9 sounds of the shofar. But I can do it whenever I want. In the daytime. I can do it when I get up. I can do it during lunch. But the Torah does not mandate when it should be done. Stage 2 is the Rabbanan indicated when and where in the day's service it should be done. Now here, again, you have to be very careful when you learn about this. Do not make the mistake of assuming that what we do today is what was done then. In stage 2, there were no shofar blowings before Musaf at all, and there was no shofar blowings after Musaf. Right? Just skip it, right? But the Chachamim were misakein that tikiyas shofar should take place during Musaf. Why is that so? We know that normally on every Shabbos and Yom Tov, the Rosh Chodesh as well, the Musaf Shemona Esrei only has 7 brachos. The first 3 brachos, the standard Amidah, the last 3 brachos, and then a middle bracha, which is about Shabbos, about Rosh Chodesh, about Yom Tov. This is true for every single Musaf, even Yom Kippur. The only exception to this is the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah that has the first 3 brachas, albeit in an expanded form. Even that is expanded, but it's the first 3 brachas, last 3 brachas. But then, instead of a single middle bracha, we have 3 middle brachas. So the Amidah of Rosh Hashanah has 9 brachos. And the 3 middle brachos, each of them has its own theme. Malchuyos is the 4th bracha, the first of the extra 3. Zichronos is the next one. Shofaros is the third one. Now each of these have the same format. In each of these brachos, we weave in 10 psukim from Tanakh, 3 from the Torah, 3 from the Kesuvim, all of which are Tehillim, 3 from the Nevi'im, and a 10th verse of the Torah. In Malchios, we chose 10 verses dealing with Hashem as King. In Zichronos, we choose 10 verses talking about Hashem remembering the good deeds of our forefathers as a merit to us. And in Shofaros, we have 10 verses that talk about different aspects of the shofar of Matan Torah, the shofar of resurrection of the dead, of the coming of Mashiach, of the ingathering of the exiles. Malchios, Zichronos, Shofros. Each of these brachos has really 3 parts to it. There is the Pesicha, the opening poem, the Psukim, and the Chasima, the conclusion. Psicha, Psukim, conclusion. The Psicha of Malchios is actually a real familiar prayer to you. That's none other than Aleinu L'Shabeach, which we take for granted. Aleinu 3 times a day. Some people call Aleinu Tfilas Haderech because you're on the way out, as it were. But Aleinu, all of a sudden, is center stage. It is the introduction to Malchios. Right? It's a really special place. And then Zichronos has a poetic introduction about God remembering everything we do, everything we think. And then Shofros talks about, again, Matan Torah. And then you have the Psukim, and then you have a concluding paragraph, which is the bracha. Right? This is Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros. Now, here is where stage 2 comes in. And remember, in stage 2, there is no shofar blowing before Musaf. There is no shofar blowing after Musaf. And you're still only blowing 9 kolos. So if you were to be in the time of the Mishnah, where stage 2 was enacted, it would be very different than today. And here is what stage 2 said. The Chachamim wanted to connect shofar blowing to Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros, in the sense that after the Chazan finishes Malchios, we blow the shofar. After the Chazan finishes Zichronos, we blow the shofar. After the Chazan finishes Shofros, the psukim of Shofros, we blow the shofar, because the shofar is perceived, or was perceived, as a cry from the heart to bring our tefillahs up to Hashem. So what you would have heard at stage 2, which is already the time of the Mishnah, when the Chazan is repeating the Amida and he says Malchios, you would hear after Malchios, Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah once. After Zichronos, Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah once. After Shofros, Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah once. You get it? 9. In other words, stage 1 is the Doraisa, 9 kolos. Stage 2 is also 9 kolos. But you do it 3, 3, 3. 3 after Malchios, 3 after Zichronos, 3 after Shofros. There was no Tekiyos at all before Musaf, that was unknown. And there was no Tekiyos after Musaf. And you didn't have the Shvarim Truas and the other things, just Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah, 3 times, but you did it 1, 1, 1. So stage 1, which is the Doraisa, does not require that it be connected to Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros. And of course, that has to be the case, because Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros themselves are not Doraisa. The recitation is not Doraisa. So obviously, the Torah was not makbid that you connected to that. Stage 2 is to connect it to Tefillah. Now, let me stop right there. It's important to know, number 1, that the stage 2 of connecting the shofar blowing to Shemona Esrei only applies b'tzibor. If you are davening Musaf b'yechidus, now Baruch Hashem, that's comparatively rare, but last year and the year before, quite a few people were davening b'yechidus because that was the height of Corona at the time. So you have to hear shofar or blow shofar, but you don't do it during Musaf. I mean, I remember years ago, I saw a man, Zechron Livracha, big tzaddik, but he was wrong on this. He was davening Musaf b'yechidus, and he had a shofar in his hand, and when he finished Malchus, he blew the shofar and Zechronos, etc. And that's absolutely not the case. In the Tefillah b'yechidus, you do not blow the shofar. You just hear the shofar before or after, whenever you get around to hearing it or blowing it. Okay, all right. So that's stage 2. Now, as far as the Mishnah is concerned, that's all you have. Meaning to say, if you would be around in the time of Rav Yehuda Hanassi, this is what you would have heard. After Malchios, Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah. After Zechronos, Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah. After Shofars, Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah. So stage 2 gets you as far as the Mishnah. That's why it's a little confusing. When you learn the Mishnayos, the Maseches Rosh Hashanah, you naturally want to read in what we do into the Mishnah, and you will discover it doesn't fit. And people get confused. But the reason it doesn't fit is what we do is after the Mishnah. It's not in the time of the Mishnah itself. So the Mishnah is not supposed to fit in the way we do it, because the way we do it is not what they did in the time of the Tanoim. We now come to stage 3. Now stage 3 is going to be our exponential leap. And this is the generation of Rebbe Avohu. Rebbe Avohu was one of the first Amoraim in Eretz Yisrael, and he was a Talmud of Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan himself is a transitional figure. Rav Yochanan was a Talmud of Rebbe, and he was both a kind of a Tana and an Amora at the same time. There were a few that had that multiple status, but Rabbi Avohu is an Amora. And here was the problem. The Torah says you have to have a trua, right, 3 times? What is a trua? Trua clearly means a crying sound. No question about that. That the oral law tells us. Trua is a yabava, which is a crying sound. But in different communities, they were doing the trua in a different way. In some communities, the trua of the Torah that they were doing is what we call a trua, which is sobbing. In other communities, what they did as a trua is what we call a shvarim, which is more of a groan, a krechs. And in some communities, they were doing a combination of krechsing and whimpering, shvarim, trua. Again, a little confusing. The Torah says trua, but there were 3 different shitos what the trua was. Now, because of this, I have to qualify even stage 1 and stage 2. Stage 1 was tekiah, trua, tekiah 3 times. Stage 2 is to split it with malchus, zechronos, and shofros. All you need are 9 kolos, to be sure. But here's the thing. Different communities were blowing it in different ways. In some communities, you would hear what we call tekiah, trua, tekiah 3 times. Yeah. In other communities, you would hear a tekiah, shavarim, tekiah 3 times. Because that is how they defined the trua of the Torah. And in other communities, you would hear tekiah, shavarim, trua, tekiah 3 times. But do you get that? At that stage, they weren't doing all of them. They were either doing the trua, or the shvarim, or the shvarim trua. Albeit only 3 times in Musaf, stage 2. So, Rabbi Avohu was concerned that because of these different minhagim, there was not a unity in Klal Yisrael. So he made a takana, and this is really going to increase our number, that every community has to have every variation. And that is why it is now the halacha that we have to blow tekiah shvarim trua tekiah, tekiah shvarim tekiah, tekiah trua tekiah. Now, but we're still operating in stage 2, so what that means is the following. After Malchios, I have to blow a tekiah trua tekiah. Got it. But since Rabbi Avo required that all the variations have to be accounted for, so I have to blow tekiah shvarim trua tekiah, like the opinion that shvarim trua is the trua. I then have to blow tekiah shvarim tekiah, like the view that the shvarim is the trua of the Torah. And I have to blow a tekiah trua tekiah, like the view that the trua of the Torah is what we call a trua. And I got to do that after Malchios. I got to do that after Zichronos. I got to do that after Shofros. That is the takana of Rabbi Avo. Now, here is the thing. Remember. There was no shofar blowing before Musaf. There was no shofar blowing after Musaf. Stage 3 simply required the incorporation of the different shitos as to what is a trua. Now, this confuses a lot of people, because what do you mean the shvarim is a trua? Shvarim and trua are different. You have to understand, the Torah says the word trua. There's a machlokes if the Torah's trua is satisfied by what we call shvarim, by what we call trua, or by what we call shvarim trua. Those are 3 interpretations as to what the Torah means by trua. So Rabbi Avo really increased the number, and that actually brings you from 9 to 30. Well, the Ramban says that count is not quite logical, but let me explain how you get 30. You have to blow after Malchios tekiah, shvarim trua tekiah. So the tekiah is 1, the shvarim is 2, the trua is 3, the tekiah is 4. So the tekiah shvarim trua tekiah is 4, tekiah shvarim tekiah is 3, tekiah trua tekiah is 3, so that's 4, 3, 3, that's 10. So it's 10 after Malchios, 10 after Zichronos, 10 after Shofros. So you've gone from 9 to 30. Now the Ramban asks a very, very logical question, that it really does not seem logical that you should count the shvarim trua as 2, because you're doing the shvarim trua based on it being the trua of the Torah. So if you're counting trua as 1, even though there's 9 short sounds, and you're counting the shvarim as 1, then shvarim trua should be counted as 1. It shouldn't be counted as 2. It's a very good kasha, but nevertheless, we count the shvarim trua as 2. Now, 2 kashas, so Rabbi Avo is described as upgrading or increasing the shofar blowing from 9 to 30. Okay. Again, I keep on repeating this. No shofar blowing before Musaf. No shofar blowing after Musaf. Only in Musaf. And if you're davening b'yechidus, it wouldn't even be in Musaf, it would just be playing the 30 kolos. Now, this is abbreviated. It's good to know these abbreviations. Maybe you know it already. Tekiah, shvarim, trua, tekiah is abbreviated tashrat. Tuf, shin, reish, tuf. What does that stand for? Tuf is tekiah, shin is shavarim, reish is terua. Now you might wonder, why is reish trua? Trua begins with a tuf, Answer is very simple. Yeah, Trua begins with a Tuf, but so does Tekiah begin with a Tuf. So to indicate in your writing that you're referring to the Trua one rather than the Tekiah one, we use the second letter of Trua, which is Resh. So Tekiah, Shvarim, Trua, Tekiah is, the acronym is Tashrat. Tekiah, Shvarim, Tekiah is Tashat. Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah is Tarat. So I can now use this abbreviation instead of having to say the words in full. So, after Rabbi Avo's Takana, after Malchios, one Tashrat, one Tashat, one Tarat. After Zichronos, one Tashrat, one Tashat, one Tarat. After Shofros, one Tashrat, one Tashat, one Tarat. And in the cheshbon of the way we count it, you now have 30 kolos. Now, there are two problems with Rabbi Avo that one needs to answer. Problem one is, who gave Rabbi Avo the authority? What, Rabbi Avo didn't like the fact that different communities were doing different things, so he made a takana. What do you mean he made a takana? Number one, only the Sanhedrin can make takanos for the entire Jewish people. He was not Sanhedrin. I mean, what gave him the authority? That's a difficult issue. And indeed, it could very well be that he really didn't make a takana. He started a practice in his Beis Knesset. In other words, he said in his Beis Knesset, we're going to do all the options. And when the Gemara was written, it then became the halacha, because again, we talked about this, Ravina and Ravashi, who gathered together all the sages, when they codified a practice, that was equivalent to a decision of the Sanhedrin. So technically, it's not Rabbi Avohu that made it a universal practice. Rabbi Avo started the practice locally, and the Mesadrei Hashas were koveya this as a proper practice. That's issue number one. Issue number two is a tshuva of Rav Hai Gaon. Rav Hai Gaon was the last of the Gaonim and the greatest of the Gaonim. And Rav Hai Gaon raises a shaila. Before Rabbi Avo, different places were doing it in different ways. Some were doing just the Trua, some were doing just the Shvarim, some were doing Shvarim Trua. The Torah means something when it said Yom Trua. And if people were not doing it right, they were not Yaitse the mitzvah. That means 2/3 were getting it wrong. I mean, one of these three ways is right. That implies two of the three ways are wrong. How could it be that the Jewish people forgot how to fulfill such an important mitzvah as Tekiyah Shofar? Were they getting it wrong until Rabbi Avo unified all the minhagim? So Rav Hai Gaon says a very interesting chiddush. This is not a question of some are right and some are wrong. The Torah requires that you have a crying sound on Yom Kippur. On Rosh Hashanah. All three variations were acceptable. The Torah permitted the crying sound to be made in any of the three ways. So it's not the way people think. People think Rabbi Avo was concerned that people wouldn't be Yotzei if they got the wrong one, so therefore he made everybody blow everything. Not emes. You were Yotzei with whichever version you used. You were Yotzei with a Trua. You were Yotzei with a Shvarim. You were Yotzei with the Shvarim Trua. Now, I'm a supik. Maybe you'd even be Yotzei by one, maybe you can combine them. You could have Tekiah, Trua Tekiah, Shvarim Tekiah. In other words, maybe one of each you'd be Yotzei Lagamri. So Rabbi Avo's concern was not, as you might think, are you going to be Yotzei if you use the wrong one? Rabbi Avo's concern was he wanted there to be unity on Rosh Hashanah. Yeah, each person could be Yotzei in a different way, but when we stand before Hashem, we want to have an achdus, a unity. Okay, so whatever the reason is, we leave Rabbi Avo, first generation Amira, And we've upgraded, if that's the right word, our tekios from 9 to 30. Okay. Stage number 4. The introduction of an additional shofar blowing before Musaf. That came later. That is after the Mishnah, and that's even after the first generation of the Amoraim. In fact, the Baal Amor argues that it's even after the Gemara Lagamri, that it's from the Gainim, it's not even from the Amoraim. Most do see it from the time of the Amoraim. And this is the Tekiyas Shofar before Musaf, which is later. In other words, it was added much later than the Tekiyas al Musaf. And the Tekiyas Shofar before Musaf is given a name. It is called Tekiyos Demiyushav, which literally means the sitting down Tekiyos, as opposed to the Tekiyos during Musaf that are called Me'umad, the standing Tekiyos. Why are the ones before Musaf called the sitting? Because Lamaisa, we do stand up. Because since it's not connected to an Amida, it's not connected to a Shemona Esrei, you actually are allowed to sit down, as opposed to the Tekiyos connected to the Shemona Esrei, even though you're allowed to sit down during Chazar Hashatz. But since it's connected to the Amida, it's called the standing Tekiyos. So Tekiyos de Mu'umad was already stage 2. Tekiyos de Miyushav is stage 4, after Rabbi Avo's Takana. Why do we need Tekiyos de Miyushav at all? Why do we need it? I mean, the Torah says you got to blow a Tekiya, true Tekiya 3 times. We have 3 different shitas about that. So Rabbi Avo includes everything, and we do it in Musaf. Malchiyas, Sechronis, and Shofars. What need is there for a shofar blowing before Musaf? So there are 2 reasons that are given. One reason is quite literally a matter of convenience. There might be elderly people, sick people, women with children, who might be able to attend the davening, but cannot stay for a lengthy Musaf. They cannot wait for Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros. So in order to give them the ability to fulfill the mitzvah of shofar blowing without having to be in shul for the Musaf, we blow shofar before the Musaf. Which actually means, according to that understanding, the real mitzvah is what you do during Musaf, but for the people who aren't going to be able to make it, they should have kavanah in the Tekiyos Dimi Yoshav. That is one reason. Of course, we tend to do it the other way. We tend to blow after davening for people who couldn't make it, but the Miyoshav was for people who couldn't stay for davening. The second reason that's given, which is actually based on a Gemara, is La'arbev es hasatan. The purpose of the first set of shofar blowings is to confuse the satan. What does it mean, confuse the satan? Right? The satan represents the angel or the force in the world whose job it is to prosecute the Jewish people. Like the devil's advocate. By the way, the satan is very different than Christian theology. No, Christian theology looks at Satan as devilish, as evil, as the anti, whatever, who is there to fight God. In our tradition, Satan has a job like other angels have jobs. Satan is part of the heavenly court, and Satan is like the district attorney. Satan is the prosecutor. He's not a disgraced figure. He's up there, meaning to say, whatever this means. I mean, we use these words as metaphors. We really don't understand it. But God is like sitting as judge, and there are defense lawyers talking about the good things that we've done, and there's prosecuting lawyers that talk about the bad things that we've done, and God has to weigh them. And right, that's the picture that the book of Iyov gives you of literally the heavenly court. So the Satan is part of that process. The Satan is on the prosecution team. So he's not like an anti-demonic figure that is trying to fight God. He has a job up there. But so the Satan's job is to be makatreg. Makatreg is to be a prosecutor, to bring up all of our weaknesses, all of our bad points. But here is the thing. One of the images of shofar is kind of the summons to judgment. We're being called to judgment. That's why there's the fear and trembling. Now, when a defendant who's being tried for his life is kind of eager to be called to judgment, he's blowing the alarm to judgment, the prosecutor gets a little confused. Hey, what does he have up his sleeve? If he's inviting Hashem's judgment. So the Satan gets confused, the Satan gets mavulbal. Again, we don't fully understand what this means, because the Jewish people are kind of almost eager to be summoned to divine judgment. And as a result, the Satan gets confused and is unable to be makatrig. What that basically means is, to put it in regular English, when the Satan sees the devotion of the Jewish people to proclaim Hashem as Melech, the Satan is unable to point out our flaws because there's so much goodness that is there. Okay? So those are two reasons. So the early shofar blowing that's earlier than it should be, is kind of the way we show that we're ready to put ourselves in Hashem's hands and be judged. Now, once you have to have a shofar blowing before Musaf, you got to do it with 30 kolos, because you have to have tekiah, trua tekiah 3 times with all of the variations. So once again, you understand, theoretically, if you would have had a miyushav without Rabbi Yevo's takana, that could have been 9 kolos. But you see, historically, the miyushav is after Rabbi Yevo's takana. So that's why you have 30. Okay, you see, because whenever you do your tekiah, trua tekiah 3 times, you got to have each version of it 3 times. So we've now gone from 9 to 60. Okay, no tekiyas after Musaf yet. Even after stage 4, no tekiyas after Musaf. So you've gone up to 60. Okay, so now we come to stage 5. And this is Vadai not in the Gemara, this is post-Gemara. And the first mention of it is in the Aruch. Now, who's the Aruch? The Aruch is actually the first Jastro, and even Ohr Somayach would allow you to look it up because it's in Hebrew and Aramaic. And Rav Nassan is a Rishon, and he compiled a dictionary of the Aramaic terms in the Shas. But because the Aruch is a Rishon, he'll often interpret the Gemaras when he gives you the translations, and his shitos are relevant in halacha too. So it's not just a dictionary, there's a lot of halacha that's in the shita of the Aruch. And the Aruch records a minhag. So he didn't create the minhag, it must have been an existing minhag, that we want to hear the shofar on Rosh Hashanah 100 times. And that's based on the idea that Sisera, who was a general, a Midianite general who wanted to destroy us, and he got killed by Yael, who drove a tent stake through his head, and this was memorialized in the Song of Devorah, in the book of Shoftim. So Devorah mentions how Sisera's mother was waiting for her son, not because she cared about him so much, but she said, "What's taking so long? I want the jewelry, I want the clothing, the spoils of war that he's going to bring." And it says she cried 100 times, 100 sobs. So we want to counteract her 100 sobs by the 100 shofar blowings. Now, what does that mean? What do you mean we have to counteract her sobs? She's long gone. What are her sobs? So the answer, once again, is in a deeper meaning. And that is, Hashem is responsive to all human suffering, even of the unworthy, and even of the evildoers of the world. A mother crying over the absence of her son awakens divine mercy. And that applied then, and that applies now if a Palestinian woman is crying over a terrorist son who died or whatever it is. But the problem is, when Hashem shows mercy to the evildoers, that could be very bad for us. So we need to turn to Hashem, as it were, and say, Hashem, I know you feel sorry for them, but look at us. So that's what it means. We have to counteract the pain of the Rishayim by asking Hashem to turn to us. And that's what, therefore, the minhag was a minhag to blow the shofar 100 times on Rosh Hashanah. So now, and right now I'm addressing the minhag Ashkenaz, the minhag that you're going to see here. I know there are other minhagim, and I'll talk about that tomorrow. How do you get 100? So now you understand what's going on. By the time I did the miyushav, I did 30. And by the time I did the mu'umad, I did another 30. So I've already done 60. So, and I need to do 40. Right? So after Musaf, I need to do 40 to be mashlim the 100 sounds of the shofar. So the way we do it is this. In the middle of Kaddish, before Tiskabel, we blow the shofar 30 times. And how do you get that? That just means 3 tashrats, which is 12, 3 tashats, which is 9, 3 tarats, which is 9. That gets you 30. And then the Chazan finishes the Kaddish of Tiskabel. And then after the Kaddish, we're just 10 short. So very simple. 1 tashrat, which is 4. 1 tashat, which is 5, which is another 3. So that's 7. And 1 tarat, another 3, which gives you 10. Okay? So this will not make your shofar blowing shorter, but at least you'll understand what it is. So that way it's not going to hit you like it hit me. Like, what is going on there? Why do they keep on blowing it over and over and over again? But the short answer is because we got to get 100. And this is the final stage in the evolution of the mitzvah of Tekiyah Shofar. And it is absolutely post-Talmudic, meaning the time of the Gemara, they did not, B'dafka, have Mea Kolos. The minhag is recorded by the Sefer HaOruch, which is the generation before Rashi, but he didn't create it. It must have been an existing minhag in some places. And to this day, there are some kehillos, very few, who do not have 100 kolos on Rosh Hashanah. They just do the 30 and the 30, and they don't have to blow anything afterwards. Okay? So this is how we get 100 kolos on Rosh Hashanah. Now, I'll talk about tomorrow some other minhagim, because there are minhagim that actually blow in the silent Amida, and we'll talk about how that works tomorrow. But here, we do not blow in the, and most Ashkenazim, the minhag Ashkenazim is not to blow in the silent Amida, so we only blow 30 miyushav, 30 in the repetition of the Shemona Esrei, and then we do 40, splitting up the 30 in Kaddish before Tiskabel, and the 10 after Kaddish, after you finish the Kaddish. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow.